So we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Now, I actually posted an older Lessoncast yesterday that kind of went through the whole process of McKinley's reelection and assassination. This one is going to focus on President Theodore Roosevelt. We'll be spending a few days on President Teddy. And I'm going to be very upfront about this. There's this lesson cast will be sort of vague because a lot of the information that we're going to be learning about Teddy is going to be coming through the group scavenger hunt activity you guys will be doing over the next couple of days. So as a quick recap, McKinley went on a victory tour of the United States to celebrate his very easy reelection in 1900. And his advisors were very concerned for his safety, given the rise in anarchist issues in Europe, including several successful assassinations of various and sundry people, the most prominent of which being the King of Italy. McKinley wasn't concerned at all. He really had no concern for people who disagreed with him. He felt that was just, they're entitled to disagree with me. What's the big issue? Well, the big issue is when you have somebody who's mentally deranged, literally, in possession of a firearm, and who's also a flaming whack job Marxist in the form of Leon Czolgosz, who kills McKinley. McKinley dies on the early morning of the 14th of September. Only 8 days after he's shot. Because of his rather large tummy, they couldn't locate the bullet, and the bullet was lodged somewhere inside of him. He developed gangrene, and that's what killed him. Roosevelt was on vacation. He was actually in the Adirondacks climbing, and they sent a special messenger out to retrieve him. And the telegram basically said that McKinley is going to die within the next day. You have to get back. And there was a special train waiting for him in Buffalo to take him to Buffalo. Roosevelt delayed leaving by a couple of hours. And it's not because he was being mean or he didn't want to deal with this. His wife literally pointed out to him that he was so excited that it would really be unseemingly bad for him to show up happy when McKinley was dying. And he had to calm himself down. He arrives about 13 hours after the death of McKinley. And he is sworn in on the afternoon of the 14th as the youngest man ever to be president. He was only 42 years old. And Roosevelt vowed to continue the successful policies of McKinley. That's very true. What is also true is the way that Roosevelt changed things after the death of McKinley. And this is the part where we're going to be a little bit on the vague side because of your group activity. Okay. Theodore Roosevelt is president for nearly 2 full terms. He has a 7.5-year presidency. And he is one of the most powerful men to ever be the president. The modern concept of what we believe a president should be and what the president can do goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt wielded an enormous amount of power. He's sort of like the anti-Grant, where Grant's attitude was, if it didn't specifically say in the Constitution that I can do it, I can't do it. Roosevelt took the opposite approach. If it didn't explicitly say that I can't do it, then I can. And even if it says I can't do it, there's a way around that. He was a leader in the truest sense. He set the example for what America should be and what Americans should be. He set the tone and the pace of the country. And there was literally nothing he was not involved with. There was no aspect of life that he did not feel that the president should not be involved with. This is why Roosevelt is very progressive. He's very much an activist and an involved with person. Now, as we'll talk about later, his progressivism is, I think, a little overemphasized occasionally. Now, it is also true to say that Roosevelt was an incredibly energetic man. I don't know if anybody enjoyed being president as much as Teddy did. Like Grover Cleveland before him, the only other president who was in his 40s when he was elected, and Cleveland was at the tail end of his 40s. I think he was like 48 when he got elected. Roosevelt and his kids just have an amazing time. Roosevelt literally has a private exotic zoo at the White House. He's got something like 30 animals, and they're allowed to roam freely around the White House grounds. He and his kids would have pillow fights in the halls of the White House. They would actually ambush the Secret Service members and like throw water balloons at them or dump stuff on them or booby trap them or attack them and jump out of the bushes. He set up a boxing ring in the basement of the White House, and he invited people to come over and fist fight with him. In fact, at one point in time, he invited John L. Sullivan, the heavyweight champion of the world for professional boxing, to come and have a boxing match with him. Roosevelt lost his hearing because of how hard he was beaten by Sullivan, but he had a great time. And Sullivan enjoyed the fact that he got to box the president. And Roosevelt didn't hold back. I mean, he went all out. In terms of domestic policy, which is a way of saying things at home, Roosevelt involved himself in business, labor, American sports, and he was a big sports enthusiast. Education, as one of you or groups will learn about tomorrow, he tried to change the English language. And he also was involved in strategies for teaching teachers how to better approach students. And as a student himself, he spoke several languages and he had almost a photographic memory. The man read something like 2 or 3 books a day and could remember everything he read from them. As a kid, he had been involved in, he had a great love for nature. He had written a science textbook. He was quite an accomplished artist, especially when it came to drawing birds and plants and animals. He was also a big game hunter. He enjoyed hunting animals. And that, by the way, is not strange. Many, and in fact, most hunters are actually very strong conservationists. For those of you who may not be aware, the teddy bear is actually named after Theodore Roosevelt. He was on a hunting trip in his presidency early on, and they were bear hunting, I think in like Louisiana or someplace. And Teddy had no luck in getting a bear. All of his friends got bears, but he didn't. So to help him out, his friends at night while Teddy was asleep captured a bear and tied it to a tree. In the morning, they woke Teddy up and said, "Hey, we found a bear for you to come and get." Okay, Roosevelt grabs his gun and goes out there. Number one, not only did they tie the bear to a tree, but it wasn't even a bear proper. It was a cub. It was a little bear cub, a baby bear. And Roosevelt's like, "What are you thinking? This is the dumbest thing ever. It's unsportsmanlike. This little bear, no, this is a baby bear. It needs to go away and be with its mom. I'll find a bear on my own or I won't get one." Now, there was a newspaper reporter with Roosevelt who drew the picture of this, and the bear became kind of a political cartoon, or like back in the day, it would have been like a meme for Roosevelt. Well, a toy company in New York thought it would be a good idea to capitalize on this, so they created a small stuffed bear, and they named him the Teddy Bear, or Teddy's Bear. And the teddy bear became the most popular selling toy in America. In terms of foreign countries, Roosevelt was involved as much as he could be. If it was anything that he felt that America had an interest in, he was there. He got involved with disputes between foreign countries. He also felt that it was his job to protect America, and that was a pretty broad definition of protection. Now, one thing that Roosevelt did that had never been done before, Roosevelt viewed his office as a way to get what he wanted done by Congress. Now, remember, according to the Constitution, and this is true of Bain too, the legislative branch actually makes the laws. The president has no role in this. He cannot suggest laws. He cannot appear before Congress and introduce them. He has no ability to do that. His only power in lawmaking is to either accept the law or reject it. Roosevelt had a lot of ideas, and the Congress were not going along with him. Remember, many Republicans didn't like him, and they really weren't being very cooperative. So what Roosevelt began doing was he went directly to the public. Roosevelt built the White House press room, and he began holding press conferences every day where he would put out to the American people through newspapers, the newly developing radio industry, in any way, shape, or form, what his ideas were. And he would tell the American people to contact their congressmen and their senators and tell them to vote for what Teddy wanted. And if not, they would be replaced in the next election. It worked really well. Now, also, at Roosevelt's press conferences, it was not infrequent that the press would begin asking him questions about secret issues that nobody should have known about. How is this possible? And Roosevelt was so angry that somebody was leaking information to the newspapers, and he vowed to find who it was in the White House and get rid of them, but he never had any success. And the newspapers always seemed to be one step ahead of him with policies, laws, ideas, things going on that he really didn't want to deal with, but he had to. The reason he never caught the person leaking the information is because it was him. He staged all of it. He purposely became the leak, the narc, the mole in the White House to fuel what he wanted to accomplish. Now, in terms of business and the economy, and you guys will spend a lot more time with this too, with your group activity. Many people are under the mistaken belief that Roosevelt was against big business. He was not. He was a millionaire. He loved money. He knew that big business was necessary for the United States economy and well-being and prosperity. However, where he drew the line is if that business restricted competition, then it needed to be dealt with. And to deal with it, Roosevelt began using an obscure law passed in 1890 known as the Sherman Antitrust Act. And yes, this is the same Sherman who was behind the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Essentially, what the Sherman Antitrust Act did was it allowed the government to investigate companies that were accused of being monopolies and restricting trade. In Teddy's view, if a company restricted trade, it was bad and needed to be regulated. If it didn't, let it be happy and do what it wants and make its money because everybody's going to benefit. The Sherman Antitrust Act had been introduced in 1890. The three previous presidents, that's Harrison, Cleveland, and McKinley, had used the Sherman Antitrust Act a grand total of 18 times in something like 13 or 14 years. Roosevelt uses it 44 times. And specifically, Roosevelt goes after companies owned by J.P. Morgan. Roosevelt and Morgan have a very tense relationship with each other. Roosevelt felt that Morgan was trying to control and manipulate the government, and Morgan felt that Roosevelt was being petty and power hungry. In the end, Morgan kind of gets the last laugh, which we'll talk about. The only bump in Teddy's presidency is a very brief, like 12-week depression that the U.S. gets into, a recession, I should say. And to aid in this trust busting, Roosevelt created a new advisory department, the Department of Commerce and Labor, which was later split into two separate cabinet departments. What it did was it investigated big business to make sure that the businesses were not violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. The group that did this was a department within the Commerce and Labor known as the Bureau of Corporations. And its job was to investigate industry to make sure that no violations of the antitrust laws were present. Teddy also, unlike previous presidents, when he got involved with strikes, he tended to be much more sympathetic with strikers and kind of forced businesses to figure out a way to negotiate and did not put up with the whole blacklisting, conspiracy law, strike breaker thing that had been going on before that. So we'll pick this up a little bit more later, but this is a nice brief overview into what we're going to talk about over the next few days with Teddy. Peace and love.